Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Forgive me, I've been told to remain reasonably in the same place. Forgive me if I tip over the edge. I do teach in here and I'm sort of used to wandering up and down. Fiona, you chose this slide for me very helpfully. Is that me trudging through the desolate brains of our students, or am I looking for the oasis? They're all following me. That's good. Oh, have we got the... Thank you very much. Because we have a problem in Southampton Business School. And that is, it's the reverse problem for Eleanor, actually. And, you know, they don't know what to do. All our students, it's split into half, 50-50, I would say, maybe 60-40. Some of them, the only reason they do a degree in business and management or accounting and finance or whatever it might be, is I want to go to university, but I don't know what it is I want to do. Okay, that's helpful, but not helpful. And of course, a lot will do accounting and finance because it's about numbers, isn't it? Yeah, no, it isn't. Although I have to admit, do you know how beautiful double entry bookkeeping is? Do you know how wonderful how elegant it is? This is I'm not going to go through that. I'm really tempted to, but I won't. This is a ledger, a 19th century ledger. And I have to try and get over to the students. This is a wonderful, beautiful subject, and they're sort of edging towards the door at this point. But there is a real problem here. It's not just us. The ICAEW, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, have faced exactly the same problem. We've been talking to them. And that is that students don't realise just how interesting business is at an intellectual level. Accounting, marketing, finance, law. There is no art and culture without business. Okay? The very first written records are accounts. The Babylonian Hammurabi, it's accounting. It really matters. And I can say this because I teach accounting, but I'm not an accountant. I'm a historian. And that will have relevance, as you'll see. So we have this issue. And is then what do we do about it? How do we persuade students that business matters, that business is interesting? Now, there are a variety of strategies in place, but one of the things that we started to do, and this was prompted by a colleague of mine, Mark Gadenby, who was head of undergraduate studies, and he said to me, why don't we give our students some history? And I have to admit, you know, my PhD is in economic history from LSE. Although I teach accounting and finance, and I was sort of always a bit leery about history in a business school, saying, well, yeah, but will they be interested? Will students want to do it? And so we thought, yes, let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. So we developed a history module, a third-year history module, Man 3065. And I also have third-year students doing dissertation. Now, the question is, you know, history. You know, it's not Hitler and Stalin and Henry VIII, or even worse, the sex life of Henry VIII. It's about the history of business. And it's about history as a method. Now, this is relevant, profoundly relevant to technology, as you'll find out, because technology, the digital camera, the tablet, the internet has revolutionized how we can teach history. With another hat on, I'm a trustee of an organisation called the Business Archives Council. The Business Archives Council consists of the archivists of the Bank of England, the archivists from HSBC, Lloyd's Banking Group, John Lewis Partnership, London Metropolitan Archives, National Archives. And we're concerned with the preservation and use of business records. And what I do, with the third year module and with dissertation students, is we use archives to inform the module, to inform the dissertation. And in addition, we have just set up, and it's the only one in the UK, in fact, I think it's the only one in Europe, a business history degree in partnership with Eleanor and her colleagues down in history. And that will that will start next September. So, what I want to talk about is how technology can help us do that, and some of the opportunities that might throw up. Now, I don't know how many, it's difficult to see with this, rather like an interrogation here, you know. How many people here watch Who Do You Think You Are? Come on, there's more of you than that. Time Team, anyone here ever watch Time Team? Yeah, there's a few there. If you watch Who Do You Think You Are, you'll recognise this place. This is National Archives. It's my favourite place in the entire world. I love going and working there. And you can, that's not me, as you can see, but there's some chap sitting there looking at records. And what you used to have to do, when I was doing my PhD, you'd pitch up there, you'd start work at 9:30 and you'd work through till 5 o'clock, and you'd take a pencil and you'd make notes from all of the archive material. Now, that's a problem if you live on the Isle of Wight and work in Southampton, because it takes a while to get up there and it's extremely expensive. By the time you get there, you sit down, you do the reading, and it's time to go. But the digital camera means that you can take, I can do 700-800 pictures, JPEGs, of documents in a day. That keeps me going for 3 or 4 weeks. So I started to do that because it was an easy thing to do, but then realised, of course, you've got all these images. You can give them to students. So what I started doing over the last, I think this is the 4th year, is I've given students, you know, a 400 JPEG, 400-page file for them to interpret. And so they've done, the best example, I guess, is of a student who graduated last year who wrote a very critical 10,000-word dissertation on the role of Deloitte Haskins and Sells management consultants in the privatisation of British Railways in 1993. So this material I'd collected. There's no ethical issues because you know, it's in the public domain. This is the government records. It's the National Archives. And you know, so he was able to go through it, and I give them guidance, but I don't tell them, you know, what to look at. They have to look at everything. And he did a very good dissertation. I think he got 83%. He got a job at Deloitte's in the management consulting. And when they found this out, they said, oh, that's fascinating. Could we have a look at your dissertation? But it worked very well because they liked the critical view he had taken. And so that was last year. I had another student looking at the development of international taxation, looking at Hoffman the Roche and the very first Engelbert Humperdinck American tour in 1969 and how the tax policy was planned. So this year I have students looking at Concorde, project management of Concorde, and the point at which the British government suddenly realised, oh, this is going to cost a lot of money. I also have students looking at the Arnold Weinstock and the Industrial Organisation Corporation in the 1960s, where the government suddenly realised Arnold Weinstock has lied to them all through these negotiations. You can see the horrified marginalia and the comments on these documents as they suddenly realise this. So that student's looking at mergers and acquisitions. And I also have a very good student looking at valuation records for the National Coal Board, and one looking at the failure of Rolls-Royce in 1971, and the bank saying to the Bank of England, you've lied to us, why, you know, your financial accounts aren't correct. It's nice the bank saying that rather than the other way around. And it's all material taken from the National Archives. So, and that's working, touch wood, reasonably well. And it's getting students interested in the technology, in the business processes. Now, what the information revolution is doing, aside from being able to collect this information, there's also material available on the internet, and I'll come on and tell you a bit more about that in a moment. But it does pose a problem. How do we then train the students to interpret this material? Now, of course, if you're in Eleanor's history department, you get courses on evidence interpretation, historiography. This is slightly different. Our students are using history as a method. They are not historians. In fact, one student did me the enormous honour of saying to me, do you know, I hate history, but I've really enjoyed this module. And that's actually what we want. We want people who are not historians, but to engage with history, to use it as a method to understand the current business world, to understand how to apply theory. So that's one element of it. But there are other elements, as we see. So then we need to think about, well, what is the nature of the evidence? The great thing about the internet is there's so much there. How do we interpret? The skills of the historian are actually the skills of the auditor. Well, auditors want to understand the histories of businesses, how they are recorded, how the archive gets created. And so then we need, and this is where it comes into education, what I now need to do is sort of to establish sort of training in interpretation of records. And this has a much broader contract. This goes into lifelong learning, into outreach. I'm working with enthusiast groups. The Historical Model Railway Society. Geeky? Come on, come up with a geekier, you know. They build model railways, you know, train spotters, all of that. They also sponsor PhD students. They've got an archive, a professional built, purpose-built archive with 150,000 drawings in it. And so I'm working with them to try and use some of that information in the curriculum. They've got a huge amount of records. And there are a lot of organisations like they want to work with this. So this sort of gets into outreach, engagement. It takes you into the archives and museums. I'm talking to the National Archives, the British Library, Southampton Archives, about how we can develop material in their collections. I've also got a workshop the end of May at Ironbridge Gorge Museum, the heart of the Industrial Revolution, if you like, UNESCO World Heritage Site, about using, it's a workshop on business and management in the Industrial Revolution, and part of the idea of that is to be able to use their records in teaching. This is, and developing the case studies that inform this teaching is teaching-led research. So, you know, the sort of things here, this is actually in, I think it's in Norwegian actually, but I was trying to find Southampton relevant. This is an immigration contract, a form of ticket, I think, for Cunard, for people going from Norway to North America. So, you know, you'd need the legal skills, but you can then start to, well, what was the nature of the contract? What information was in the contract? Here we have the Harland and Wolff shipyard. Again, I guess it's a Titanic link. The drawing of, you know, how was the workplace organised? Now, for people studying HR, that's interesting. There are records, there are reports that go with that. There are also pictures and maps. So again, this is using documentary evidence, not just the straightforward financial, accounting, legal. We want to use a wide range of evidence. And this is just down, that on the right-hand side is the White Star headquarters. You can see the Rao link at the bottom there, down near Pilgrim's House, where there's a fantastic Chinese restaurant that some of you might know. And you've got that, and then you've got a map of that area there, a really detailed ordnance survey map. Now that's interesting for accountants because, believe it or not, tax valuation is fascinating. How do you value something? I get students, I get a volunteer, actually I should speak to the anatomist here, because I get students to stand up and I say, right, everyone, you know, 300 students in there, you've got to value this person. How much are they worth? And they do pretty soon get into scrap value and eyeballs and kidneys. It's rather disturbing because these are accountants. It's really... but these maps are used to value. So, and when we look at change, if we go here, now you can't just here, that is the development, that's Herbert Walker Way. It's just opposite the, what's the name of the posh hotel? De Vere. Herbert Walker Way, that's when it was being filled in. So that's Southampton Docks. So that's the process in which the docks take the shape they do today. That there is Southampton Central Station on the left-hand side, not 100 years ago. That's the right-hand side, so that's looking down towards Weymouth, and you can see this, you know, that's all HSBC and concrete monoliths and God knows what else there. The Costa Coffee's through there. Now the point about this is, it's fascinating to see its local history. But what I want students to understand is continuity and change. I want them to understand how these landscapes became the way they did. And then what they have to do, they have to look at images and they have to look at the valuation documents and say, well, you know, what is the value of these? How were these assets valued? And then from that value, from the cost, you can then work at, well, look at landscape change. How do we understand change? It's incredibly important to understand innovation. But we want to understand in history continuity and change. And we can use this to illustrate the point. The other thing that we can use and which are not used enough are the physical remains. There is a discipline, of course, industrial archaeology, where we could use, where people use physical remains to be able to understand the past. But we want to do something about that. My wife now refuses to go around museums with me because, particularly the Science Museum, I want to weep whenever. I apologise for anyone here who's related to anyone who's designed anything in the Science Museum, but it's an appalling institution. It had been taken over by cultural mores and has very little engineering left in it. When I were a lad, a long time ago, you'd go in there and there would be, the part of the Comet aircraft that crashed in the 1950s, and with it went the British aircraft industry, or so they say. And there would be this piece of wreckage, and it'd have an interpretation. It sort of went sort of numpty, then it went O-level, then it went A-level, then it went sort of degree, and it might even be an equation in there. So that when you went there, you got a sense of the engineering. When last I saw it, it was part of an exhibition on Dan Dare, and with no explanation. It's just said, door from the comet, or wreckage from the comet. So with apologies to anyone who's had anything to do with the Science Museum, one of the things we want to do, and I want to get students involved on this, is to, when you walk into a museum and you see a line of RAF Museum at Duxford, 23 different types of engine, all lined up against the wall. And of course, the engineer enthusiasts and people go there and they know exactly what these things are. And a word of advice, never ever use a picture of a piece of technology in a lecture to engineering students. I did it, I showed a picture and I said, oh, that's a Merlin engine. And someone came up to me and said, oh, actually, no, that's not, that's a Meteor engine. Well, it's like a Merlin, but it was put into tanks and it had this very long... And I said, how do you tell the difference? He said, well, it is actually rather difficult, so that was a relief. But it's that, okay, so we've got the technology here. We can understand the technology. But why are there so many variations? And what do they do? And a lot of it, of course, is business. It's their cost. It's about cost and performance. Why don't we see that in the exhibition? So I'm talking to people in a variety of guises about being able to inform exhibitions with business content. To say, let's look at the cost structures of this factory. You go to Ironbridge Gorge Museum, you see the very first furnace where Abraham Darby was able to smelt iron and steel with using coal. Well, let's see on the descriptor, let's see, well, what are the relative costs? Because actually, if you don't understand that, you don't understand the significance of the technology. And so the idea is that we get students thinking about that. And we get students able to contribute towards that. Maybe even get placements. That's the ultimate objective. This here is the Babcock and Wilcox crane from Cowes. You can just see the backside of the car ferry there. And again, there's an issue here that might be useful for our students as well from this sort of heritage viewpoint, because this is a listed building. They're trying to think about what to do with it. They're trying to build up business cases about what this can do. So there is a link with the heritage industry here, and we have a master's program in heritage that's just started, I believe, down in humanities, that we can contribute to. So it's linking technology to the business content, and that is not done anywhere. And that is one of the things we want to try and get our students involved with. So we have all this information. So we need to think about then how do we train the students more effectively to be able to interpret this material, but then develop short courses, because as I say, there's a huge enthusiast community that are really interesting. You know, they're writing histories, and family historians and local historians saying, well, we come across these records all the time, but we don't know how to use them. You know, balance sheets are very interesting. Now they are, really. You can tell all sorts of things. You know, one of the reasons why double entry bookkeeping is so interesting, you can tell all sorts of things about relationships, about who's trading with who, about where they are. So you can create all sorts of networks. So it's this sort of thing that we want to get out there and inform the wider public about. Now, of course, back in the day, when I was doing my PhD 20 years ago, as I say, you were tied to the archive. But what technology, what the JPEG has enabled you to do, you know, you can collect the 800 images. And what I do, you put them on a tablet and then you're sitting, you know, you can focus in on them. It's a very effective way of using your time. So for the hour that I come across in the car fare in the morning and in the evening, I'm sitting there with my tablet and with documents from the National Archives, going through, making notes, and that's feeding into my teaching and into my research. So it takes you out of the archive. And that's an example of the sort of thing. There's 1,500 pages of that I've got to go through. It's the Rates Advisory... No, I won't even tell you what it is. It's the Rates Advisory Committee of the Ministry of Transport in 1919. And 1,500 pages worth. That's what I'm going through at the moment. So that's the sort of thing that I can collect. That's the sort of quality that you can get. And yeah, you can't see it there, but when you can focus in on an iPad or a tablet, then, you know, it's very effective. And this is the sort of material, this is one of my students, is looking at the Anglo-French Committee to examine economic prospects of Concord. And it's the sort of thing you pull up out of the National Archives and go through and interpret them. You'll notice it's not spelt with an E. They were very, I don't think that came in until 1970, but anyway. So the students get this and 200, 300, 400 other JPEGs. But this is very exciting. Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher Foundation. I didn't know they actually had one. But the Margaret Thatcher Foundation, I only found this out in September, just before I was starting teaching. That was a bit of a downer, so I couldn't offer this to any students, but I did use it in my teaching. What they have done, okay, so you go into the National Archives, explain, you go into the National Archives, and you pull out the papers. So you can go in there and you can look, 1985-86, they're declassified. And if you want to get a rather spirited discussion, on Radio 4 there's UK Confidential, which was broadcast between Christmas and the New Year, where various people were talking about, it was Neil Kinnock, Nigel Lawson, Kim Howells, were talking about the miners' strike, we're talking about Westland, all things that happened in 1985 and 1986, and now the records have been released. I mean, some of you might be, you know, this gets reported on the news, about they find out where someone's been dishonest or someone lied, surprise, surprise, this sort of thing. Well, what you've got here, the Margaret Thatcher Foundation take only the Prime Minister's files, and they've digitised them, and they've put them online. Now, why that is exciting is because you can then see 200, 300, 400-page documents that deal with politics, economics, business, what I use them for. So this year is very exciting because you have the Westland crisis. Some of you, this won't make any sense at all, but I'll leave you to Google Westland crisis. When Michael Heseltine stormed out of the cabinet, you've got those papers, and it's an issue of industrial policy. It's an issue of foreign ownership of British business, and you've got these documents. And you've also got the Big Bang, not the Big Bang Theory, or it's not Simon Cox. It's about stock exchange regulation or deregulation. Some people put it down to the banking crisis, the advent of the Big Bang. You've got these documents. You've got privatisation documents. You've got a 200-page document on the privatisations of British Petroleum. Now, our students are looking at mergers and acquisitions. They're looking at accounting, as issues of accounting here. You introduce them to this, they are getting a look into that world of decision-making, the real document. And that's exciting, and they like it. Much to my surprise, I have to say. In the interest of disclosure, I should say, you know, when we set up the module last year, it's a third-year option module. We've got 42 students on it, which is, you know, pretty good for a first run of something the students are not used to. So they don't know history, they don't understand, they don't like history, as I said. So this is one element of how the internet is useful for teaching. Now, in some ways, what I want to do is to take much more from the archive and put it into, well, it wouldn't be a textbook. The whole point is I want to be able to take the financial records, the legal records, the images, film, a huge film archive, the British Film Institute, huge amounts of material. A lot of it available under Creative Commons. You know, we can use it as an educational establishment, we can use it for nothing. There are organisations, you know, the Bank of England, they want people to use their archives. The John Lewis Partnership, their archive is up in Maidenhead, they want people to use their archives. They want to work with academia to develop this. The British Library have huge holdings. All of the East India Company records are housed in the British Library. They want to work with academia. It's taking this model, if you like, and developing it further. And the question is, how do we do that? And that's where it starts to get interesting, because one of the things, this is very time consuming. And, you know, a lot of the time you're spending doing the day job. Okay, you know, putting together teaching material for the third year model, enabling to give me some time to do this. But, you know, it's liaising, going to archivists, it's looking and saying, well, what material have you got, and then how do you use it? And then how do you bring it together so that you can, you know, we need to find some way, and that's again why I think I'm going to come and have a word, you know, how you're putting together all of that material to teach people about the anatomy of a person. It's the anatomy of business we're interested in. The intellectual interest for our students is, how do we understand how business functions? Because that's what accountants are doing. That's what management consultants are doing. That's what auditors in particular are doing. And this also segs into, it's not just about the business school either. I put together a proposal for an engineering project. We've got some students doing engineering management, and Anna Barney asked me to put in, you know, a project. She said, you've been going on about doing this for years. Why don't you actually do something? I said, okay then. And we've actually got a student who wants to do it. So the idea will be that we'll select, you know, in conversation with the students, select, and it can be, you know, it can be Concord, but it could be all sorts of military projects are based in the National Archives. It could be something about engineering policy or industrial policy, the creation of the British computer industry, the shipbuilding industry, the British aerospace. There are a lot of engineering records that we can use. It's not just about the business school. This can be used in an engineering context, but also historians. Eleanor was right, historians are very good. Yeah, one time there were more people doing accounting with history degrees than with accounting degrees. I don't think that's any longer the case. But this sort of approach can be used, and in fact I've been involved in a second year project with humanities, looking at Southampton in the context of D-Day and the sinews of war, and the students were, you sort of guide the students to various archives and get them thinking about the management processes involved in this historical narrative. So using archives, that's the core, using archives and turning them into a useful educational tool. Now that is more problematic. That does need funding. I'm working with some colleagues in other organisations to try and get some funding to be able to develop this material, because I think it's an extremely exciting way of capturing what we do in a business school, capturing the excitement of business. And you also have something that we generally frown upon is, oh, you know, 20/20 vision, yeah, the perfection of hindsight. But we can learn something. We can learn something from hindsight. We can look back and say, oh, we know what happened. And in particular, what's been useful about the student studying Concord, so she's got the file, and then there was an oral history done at the Institute of Contemporary British History that she's able to draw on. So she's got an oral history where people are talking about the events in the file and sort of cross-correlate whether their memory is in fact selective or whether it's actually effective. So, but the problem is, you know, I don't know the appropriate technology to do this. That's why I end up talking to Fiona and her colleagues about, you know, how can we take this content and deliver it to students, and deliver it to schools. I'm talking to schools as part of my outreach responsibilities about using the extended project qualification, about using archival material to tell the story of, you know, related to business and economic history, industrial policy, but within a school's content. And, you know, schools are very happy to do that. Got 2 or 3 that are interested at the moment. And then there's a lifelong learning agenda. There's all the people that retired from Pirellis, that retired from the Ford Works. You know, they can tell a story of the workplace that is related to the location, as well as drawing on material from the Bank of England, the National Archives, and other archives. So that's the agenda, and if anyone, I'm assured that my details are everywhere in the ether. If anyone has any comments, any issues where they think actually this might not work, as you know, I'm as much in the dark as anyone, but it would be great to get some feedback about thinking, well, okay, maybe, you know, there might be problems here, or, oh, wow, yes, we might use that in another context, or if you know, have any ideas, any comments, any issues, it would be great to get feedback. And just to prove that history can get in anywhere, I was fascinated to know what a reader is. Now, at long last, I can say to people what a reader is. I didn't realise that. And it's a relief to know that the role of professors has changed a lot since then. But there's a wonderful historical study by a guy called Eugene Ferguson called Engineering in the Mind's Eye, which looks at the development of models in engineering. And at this point when models ceased to be the physical model and became computer models, and then you really see garbage in, garbage out. And he'd got a litany of failed engineering projects because they modelled it on a computer rather than on the actual thing. And I think there was a collapse of a walkway in Kansas that was blamed on insufficient modelling expertise. And finally, a next door neighbour of mine says that, who works for GKN, said that there's a big wooden wing of an Airbus 380 at, I think it's BAE Filton, where if you want to know how to wire something up, you know, you've got the CAD CAM, you've got the technology that's telling you all this, but you go to this wooden mock-up and you can actually work out whether you can actually get to it on this wooden mock-up. So modelling has a long history, and there is a mix of ancient and modern in current engineering expertise anyway. So on that point, I'll finish with 30 seconds to go. 28, 27, sorry.